Hi, everybody. We thank you for joining today. I am Sia Anagnostou with Digitalis Commons. I lead strategic partnerships at the Commons. This is one of our educational series videos that we're calling our Lunch and Learn series. Today, we have three veterans in the intellectual property and licensing field from the healthcare space who we will feature, discussing some topics that we feel are particularly relevant for funders in the healthcare innovation ecosystem as they think about patenting and licensing for their awardees. Quick overview on Digitalis Commons. So the Commons is part of the Digitalis Group, which includes Ventures. Ventures is a traditional healthcare venture capital fund. We fund across human and animal health. From Ventures was born Digitalis Commons. We are a nonprofit organization, and we work to support and fund the unfundable. We work with healthcare innovations that might not be ready for venture capital, may never fit the VC mold. Our work involves advising funders, including ARPA-H and now Wellcome Trust and others, from the earliest stages of funder strategy and program design, informing thinking about transition early on in the life cycle of a program, all the way through to when a program has been funded and we're actually thinking of and executing on transition across that life cycle. And our goal here today is to provide some information about the work that we do through our internal team and through bringing in experts, such as those you will meet on the Zoom today, who help advise across various therapeutic areas and technologies in the healthcare space. So with that, I will pause and ask our speakers to introduce themselves and their backgrounds, and then we have some questions for the team. Todd, would you like to go first?
Sure, thanks. Sia, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk here. My name is Todd Buck. I have a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology. I've been, in addition to my law degree, I've been practicing intellectual property law in the life sciences and healthcare space for over 20 years. I've done everything from litigation, trade secret litigation, IP litigation, to counseling, licensing and transactions. Recently, my practice has really evolved into more of a counseling transaction as far as working with startups and working with tech transfer offices that are also trying to push technology out to the commercialization space.
Thank you, Todd. Michele?
Hi, my name is Michele Wales. I too have a PhD in human genetics. I also worked at and ran the IP and litigation department at Human Genome Sciences, a biotech company here in the Maryland area that was acquired by GSK. I also was general counsel for another biotech company in Maryland, Adaptive Phage Therapeutics. Currently, I'm running my own law firm where I primarily work with small and emerging companies that are developing different biologics, whether it be DNA, proteins, antibodies, or diagnostic assays. And in this role, I really help the companies and funders identify technologies that that need to be developed in a commercial way. And so I help with their licensing. I help with developing an IP and implementing an IP strategy. I help with due diligence, but also I help with getting people, companies, and funders ready for an exit. And so I've been doing, like Todd, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I look forward to this opportunity and giving you some advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. Last but not least, Chris.
Great to meet everybody. Chris Jeffers. I am also one of the chorus of PhDs here who went off and sold to the dark side of law school. So I was a scientist, a biochemist and biophysicist. Then was a lawyer for about 20 some odd years, and then recently stopped practicing law to run Miletus Biotechnology, which is an advisory company. We sort of have two parts. The first, we do strict advisory work, mostly with investors, mostly working with either venture funds, hedge funds, or nonprofit funders. And then the studio side of the house, where we build venture studios and help define innovative and new methods for taking early stage technology and going from the bench to the bedside in more efficient financial structures to do so. So I look forward to talking to everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start. My first question is for Todd. Todd, a lot of the areas that we're supporting here at Digitalis and that funders support are often early discovery, well before there's a clear path to translation or even a product. And so how do both funders and innovators think about IP at such an early stage? What matters most when the end use or the product is still uncertain? Maybe you can help us think through what good enough means for early IP strategy.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and thanks for the question. I will say that, like a lot of areas of law, IP is no different here. There's no right answer. So every time we have a different company come to us or work with a different client, their IP strategy, especially at these early stages, might be a little different. So there's not going to be a one size fits all. So there is no right answer. Unfortunately, there are a lot of wrong answers. And so what we try to do is work with companies on establishing what IP they might need early on. And this is a very broad brush type of analysis that we do. Might be something like if the company or the innovator is interested in, say, a kinase inhibitor or something along those lines, we might look informally at the art out there and at the subject matter out there to gain an understanding of what could possibly be out there. But at this point in the stage in the life cycle, it's very informal. And the reason it has to be informal is because being early on, you're going to have to be very flexible and you're going to have to be very nimble. You will pivot a lot from your initial path. That's just the way it is in innovation. So spending a ton of money on formal IP analysis probably doesn't make a lot of sense in the early stages. But at the same time, informing your IP attorney or your in-house counsel about what your plans are and what you want to do is very, very valuable because they can provide some insights as well. Not only is it just a space clearance, if you will, but also maybe provide some insight on who the major players are, who the companies are, perhaps who the universities are that might have some licensing opportunities down the line available for you. So the earlier you can get in the intel for some of the technology, the better. But again, I don't think it's a good idea necessarily or an efficient use of money for a formal analysis at this point, because you don't have a commercial product and you need a commercial product to really truly clear it at this point. It's just broad brushes at that point.
Thank you. I think that's pragmatic advice. We sometimes get requests for things like freedom to operate analyses and really extensive work early on. And I think the conservative pragmatic approach that you laid out makes a lot of sense. So this next question I'll field to Michele. So when there are a lot of different players and maybe background IP, I'm sure this is a recurring issue for funders where they're funding promising science or research, and they find through that process that there's existing background IP or blocking patents that might complicate, even if it's way in the future, commercialization. So how would you advise funders and the innovators themselves to think about mitigating these risks early on in the life cycle?
Yeah, so to follow up on what Todd was saying is I agree that early on you should do a broad brush investigation to see who's out there. But frankly, I have always taken the position that you will eventually uncover more IP. It's just part of the nature of the beast is you'll go along, you'll make decisions on your product, and now suddenly other IP will come into play. And I think the gut response is, oh, we need to mitigate this risk. We need to get a license. But for me, my recommendation has always been, let's wait and let's see if there are other ways we can mitigate it. For example, like Todd was saying, it could take multiple years to get a product on the market. The IP is not going to be an issue until you're actually launched. Well, during those 5-10 years, the patent holder could actually decide to abandon the case because they're not interested. Or there could be very clear prior art that you just need to get a patent for. You might just decide to wait and see what happens. And so to get a license, again, it depends on the facts of your case, but there is a lot of value in just saying, hey, we may need a license in 5 years from now, 6 years from now. Let's wait and see what happens. The sooner you get a license, then now suddenly you're going to be on the hook for paying prosecution costs. You'll have due diligence reporting requirements. It becomes very expensive. And so just be very strategic about getting a license. But importantly, is even if your decision is to wait, when you're talking with funders, you need to be very clear on, hey, we are aware that there is this potential art out there. The last thing you want is the funders to discover the art themselves. So you say to them, hey, we've done a search, a very high level search. We are aware of this. And our plan, once you've relied on your counsel strategy, our plan is X, Y, and Z. We are going to watch this portfolio and check in every year. And if we get to the point where we have positive phase 2 data or positive phase 1 data, let's say that's when we will approach them, or we're going to oppose the patents. The thing is there are many different options to mitigate IP that you will undoubtedly discover while you develop. And that's okay, and that's expected.
But at least if they've articulated a plan, I know no awareness of what's out there, then
that's key, is to be able to communicate that you are aware, you did a reasonable search considering the stage that you're at, and you have a plan for how you're going to deal with it and why that plan is reasonable.
Great. Sort of tangentially related to that, and I know through the course of conversations with each of you and through having the pleasure of actually working with each of you throughout the years, it seems like the trend is towards more complex therapeutic modalities where there are obviously multiple components developed at various academic institutions, small biotechs, et cetera. So this idea of mitigating risk and also of how do you deal with these complex, particularly in the therapeutic space, these complex patents and licensing considerations. Would love to hear from maybe Chris initially on your perspective. How do you advise both funders and innovators themselves to think about this, and how do they, especially when you're at an early stage, how do you think about driving forward with development on something, but then also taking into account what licenses you're going to need? Love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, it's a major issue, and to echo some of the points that were made early in the process, it's very difficult to know that. Even as something as simple as what is your companion diagnostic going to be? I mean, sometimes you need clinical data to really understand, how that diagnostic is going to be correlated with, whatever your therapeutic path is going to be. So it's difficult as you progress, but it is becoming more and more the norm where, when most, Todd, Michele, and I all came up, we were still in the world of small molecules and single antibodies, where you had largely a very small number of patents that protected a fairly finite technology, like a small molecule or an antibody, or even an antibody, some derivative. And so it was fairly straightforward to identify the intellectual property that was needed for that product. Now products are getting incredibly complex. When you look at CAR Ts that have gene circuits in them, where it may have 15 or 16 elements within that gene circuit alone, not to mention the CAR T itself, the methods of manufacturing the CAR T, everything else. You look at ADCs, there are, literally more than a dozen different types of technologies that are within a typical antibody drug conjugate. So if you are looking to develop those sorts of technologies, one of the things that we're working with investors a lot now, and also have had this conversation with a number of tech transfer offices, I think there's two things that I'll focus on, although I think we could talk about this all day. One is the need for institutions, and I'm going to talk directly to government and academic institutions here, that need to work together. We've spent a lot of time, I think, in the wake of Bayh-Dole, everyone got set up as an independent economic actor, from every government agency to every single university. Sometimes every single school within a university may have its own tech transfer office. If you look at certain places like Wake Forest and others that have, very fragmented sort of intellectual property development. And so what happens is you have universities, the way I analogize it is they're licensing out one leg of a stool and telling you that you have the intellectual property to make that stool, when you don't. You need the other legs, you need the top, you need supports, whatever it is. And so I think what we're seeing now is much more of an attempt to identify those pieces of intellectual property up front, even if they're coming from disparate institutions, to try to aggregate those either in the company itself, ideally, or in some holding company that would then license those out for fields of use. But I can tell you, I'm in at least 3 different conversations with 3 different institutions now where we're going to be looking at exactly this sort of pre-aggregation. So I think pre-aggregation and then the necessity for everyone to work together in a different way. And anyone who's ever tried to do an interinstitutional agreement between 2 universities will appreciate the difficulty in getting any 2 universities to do even the most simple of tasks. So now we need to find new mechanisms and that some of that may be economic mechanisms for how do we handle royalty distributions without we can't stack 3% royalty on 3% royalty on 3% royalty on 3% royalty. So you've got to find a way to create, and I think there's a lot of lessons, just to throw this out there for those of you who are on here who are maybe came out of tech. There's a lot of lessons in tech here in terms of how we handle patent pools, how we created some of these aggregate systems. So I think one of the things that we're also looking at is learning some lessons from tech, which has always had this problem. When you have an iPhone, you have thousands of patents that make up that iPhone. The economics of how that works is incredibly complex. So maybe a long answer to a short question, but.
And Sia, let me follow up because I completely agree with Chris here. And I also am in the process of working on 2 different license agreements and with universities. And I'm really pushing back on one because it's essentially a work for hire. And they want 3 and 4% royalties, even though all they're going to do is identify, let's say, a binder, and then we have to develop the binder and put the money and do all the work. So instead of royalties, I'm pushing back on a very low equity percentage, very small. And I'm talking to them about, hey, yeah, this is, but really having the equity reflect what work they have done, the percentage. And there is a big upswing if there's an exit. The other thing I won't, when I do any license agreement at this point, I put in all that boilerplate language about a reduction in royalty fees if indeed we have to add stacking. And I know universities want to limit that, but that limit number I bring down pretty hard, especially if it's like a work for hire, because they really, it should be reflective of the amount of contribution that is going on.
Yeah. And from working a little bit in the antibody space, there's a lot more they're going to have to do to turn that into a product. So
right.
The flip side. So there's also, sometimes we encounter funders, particularly these days, a lot of the nonprofit, the disease-specific nonprofits and foundations are becoming funders of their own research and their own products. And so there have been cases where we've encountered a group that's focused on an ultra rare pediatric indication, and they're funding the development of their own gene editing or gene therapy technology. And it uses a lot of the technologies from the usual suspects, right, that we all know. And they're maybe waiting to move this thing into clinic for a disease that has, hundreds of patients because they are unable to secure the license or negotiate reasonable terms with the various companies and academic institutions. So they're not going to have the power to do this sort of patent pooling and some of these other collaborations that you mentioned. But just curious how you would advise them, because it's literally holding back innovations that can help patients,
Yeah, I can give you my 2 cents on that. And we're dealing with this now in a rare disease studio that we're building in Texas. And let me just give you an idea of there's a lot of ways to solve this, and I guarantee if Todd and Michele, have other thoughts, they're going to have other things that they can come up with on this too. But one of the ways that we've been talking about, and especially for rare disease, and this is a little bit out there, and some of you IP guys will roll your eyes, but is open source biotech, and I think there's a point for this. I think for example, let me give you this very simple example: ASO technologies, right? Antisense oligonucleotide technologies. Those can be used. There are old versions of ASOs which are largely off patent, and to the extent they're not off patent, they're going to be off patent in the next few years. One of the proposals we've talked about, and you can imagine variations on a theme on this, is to package up that intellectual property that somebody would need, that a rare disease community would need, of as much of the publicly available parts of that as you can find, and then be able to license that at a very low royalty and give them some security that they're going to have freedom to operate as long as they stay within the bounds of this. Maybe it's not the newest generation of ASO. Maybe it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. But as we all know clinically, many times, particularly if you're talking about a very small patient population and a very targeted disease, you don't need that. So I think making some of these technologies available in a packaged way gets to what you were getting back to your original question. If I was advising someone, I would try to find, a way that somebody's already packaged some of this up, especially if that's available, and get somebody to do that for you, or go to a group that could potentially, pull some of that together, because it is incredibly difficult to do. But I think we need to make that more available as institutions. You can't really put that on all the companies. They're not going to have the sophistication to do it, and they're not going to have the ability to hire a Todd or a Michele at, four figures an hour to to do this, right? So or 5 figures or 6 figures or whatever Todd is charging me. So in the end, I think it is going to be incumbent on our institutions, on all of us here in places like this, to come up with these mechanisms to make it easier for entrepreneurs to get the technology they need to move it into rare disease with those technologies.
Let me give you an alternative view as well. When I was at HGS, we obtained a patent on a very important gene that was the receptor for HIV to bind. And we put out a press release, and it created our stock price to rise. That's the time when, the notice of a patent would cause your stock price to rise. We internally discussed, frankly, like dedicating this particular patent to the public, because it was so controversial, and we knew that we would have different interest groups really fighting us on it. And so we actually came to the decision we weren't going to ever enforce this patent. And we actually started telling people we weren't, because we said it that we weren't going to enforce it against purely academic research, leaving the door closed against, the big companies if we ever wanted to go after them. The counterpoint to that is kind of what Myriad did with the BRCA genes. They did not open those out, and they were really, brought through the court systems and lost those patents because, frankly, third party, like public interest groups, women with breast cancer wanted access to those patents. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes in your small company where it's a rare disorder, I think I think there may be some argument just to move forward and let's see if the big players actually come after and go after you for 100 patients.
Right. And I've even heard of, you guys could tell me the technical term, but of some of these even funders getting a letter from those entities saying that they won't proceed with any sort of litigation given the unmet need and small size of the market. So I guess the takeaway is there's various creative ways that this can be dealt with. Okay, so I'm gonna pivot to a couple sort of different questions for you guys. When we think about, at Digitalis, funders bring us on to help deal with a lot of these different issues. How involved should a funder get, it could be any type, in the intellectual property and licensing of their awardees? I mean, should they build licensing or IP milestones into the grant? Do they pay for patent prosecution or freedom to operate, or actually be hands-on? I mean, Chris, I would be curious, hands-on in doing some of the negotiation for deals. Maybe each of you could, Todd, you go first. Tell me your perspectives on the role of a funder in this sort of space.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think a funder is spending the money, so they're going to want to protect their investments as best they can. I think you'll have some funders that will be very, very hands-on when it comes to patent prosecution, and then others may be a little bit less hands-on. But I think a funder I can't imagine a funder going to a board saying we're going to do something and we're just going to be completely hands off with the IP. I can't imagine that would be the business model. So funders will be involved, and the question is how involved are they? How involved do they need to be? And part of that is going to be the IP strategy that maybe the awardee has talked to the funder about. This is what we're planning on doing. This is how we're going to implement this. And others might be your personnel on the startup as well. If they have experience with this stuff, that's going to allay a lot of concerns to the funder as well. So again, no right answer here, but I think they're going to be somewhat hands-on, and it's just a matter of, can you negotiate how much of the hands-on they're going to be, whether it's paying for prosecution or just overseeing prosecution and having rights to refuse or whatever the arguments that are being made.
I can give a perspective from maybe a nonprofit and government perspective. I mean, we're working with one of the government agencies now. In fact, we're working with Digitalis on this to think about how, one of the things, it depends on kind of what your model is, right? If you're using sort of a DARPA, ARPA-H sort of model, where you have a group of recipients that are then driving toward a stated goal, you're looking for products at the end of that, then I think you have to be incredibly involved up front. And the funder, now being the U.S. government, being the program manager at ARPA, whoever it is, needs to be incredibly involved in making sure that the intellectual property that they're going to need for their end goal is not only aggregated, protected, licensed in the right way, the right rights. And as you know, there are various types of rights that you can put into these ARPA contracts, depending on how they're structured and what is needed in terms of government rights. So I think if you're talking about any government institution, particularly one that has a DoD, ARPA, DARPA kind of approach where you're really looking to build something, then I think you have to really be upfront and you have to start thinking about commercial early. If it's more of a generic, I would say, basic science type approach, then probably the need is probably less. So I would look at, what are you trying to create? Are you meeting your mission for whatever your mission is for that? Are you getting the intellectual property that you need to meet that mission? And I think in some cases, to Todd's point, you're going to need to be really engaged up front. In other cases, NIH, they put money out there. They don't pay any attention to what you're doing in terms of prosecution, in terms of really getting involved. So I think it really just kind of depends on, and then I think venture capitalists depend on who you're working with. Some venture capitalists are very good at intellectual property and add a lot of value. Some not so much. So yeah, so that would be a perspective. But I think in terms of the audience here, I mean, I would strongly recommend you figure out what your mission is, and you may need to really guide that. And it could even be that it's more of a studio or sort of a cumulative approach at the beginning to make sure people are working together.
And for me, I look at IP, whether or not to include IP milestones in the contract themselves. I think, I would treat IP milestones much like scientific milestones. And if part of the strategy is to, hey, we want to have an IP portfolio, well, that means in year 1, you need to get a provisional on file. Year 2, you need to have a PCT. Because if you're not forcing those milestones, it's going to be slower than expected in getting your IP portfolio, which then means everything's getting pushed.
Thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to wrap up with a little wild card question, because it wouldn't be 2025 if we didn't say the word AI on our Zoom. And then I'll just note that this is sort of a snack on some learnings from you guys. We might come back together on some other topics. So I have a twofold question, one for Michele, one for Chris. This is around how is AI changing the landscape? So the first is with respect to the nature of the products that you're seeing patented across research, diagnostic, therapeutics. That's for Michele. What kind of things are you seeing, and how is AI changing the nature of the patents? And then for Chris, how is AI changing your practice? So I'll and then we'll wrap up. I'll go to Michele, and then the rest of you, Chris, if you have time. What are you seeing at a high level?
AI is everywhere. AI is everywhere, in every invention, in every diagnostic assay, in every therapy. It's everywhere. But whether it's being used to identify new molecules, or if it's being used to diagnose, it is everywhere. It's so important that the Patent Office actually put out a report that made it explicit that AI cannot be an inventor. An inventor in the United States must be a person. And why you can kind of see how this would play out is if you did a clinical trial, you did subgroup analysis, and through your clinical trial, your AI programs predicted this particular patient class, women over 70 who've had only one child. Let's say that's, what the subgroup analysis showed. Well, the only way you came up with that was through AI, but that can't be an invention. You actually have to do some further analysis, whether it be some like routine wet data or something, in order for a person to be assigned to it. Bottom line is AI is everywhere. Patent standards are changing and trying to address this. But I think the quicker you embrace it, the better off you'll be.
Thank you. That covered everything pretty broadly, but in very quickly. And then, Chris, I know we've had a lot of discussions around how you are very open-mindedly adopting artificial intelligence into how you think about all that you do. Welcome your thoughts. It's highly controversial, I think, in the legal practice.
It is, and causes some great consternation. I am a believer that AI is, whether you like it or not, it's going to transform certain parts of the legal industry. We're all, like lawyers do, will kick and scream against it probably till the dire end, or certain lawyers will, but it is going to happen. I think we at Miletus are working with also a couple of large hedge funds to develop AI implementation to find monetizable IP. I think it's going to create a bit more of a clearinghouse for life science IP than has been there. There's always been a very large clearinghouse and market for high-tech patents, but I think that what we're seeing is AI is allowing us to uncover things in the life sciences that we weren't able to uncover before faster. And then I think the other thing, just to follow up on Michele, on Michelle's comments, I think the other thing we're seeing with AI from more of a practical perspective is intellectual property is going to get drug discovery in general is getting narrower and narrower. It's becoming more and more of a precision medicine play in most therapeutic areas. And I think most thinkers in this space are predicting that to a large extent, we're going to see things start to get narrowed down to more and more precision medicine, particularly things like autoimmune disorders and metabolic disorders, CNS, things like that. So I think two things are going to happen in the marketplace, which are also going to drive into the intellectual property. The economics of drug development are about to change significantly. And the reason for that is we are now going to have a much higher likelihood of understanding whether or not a drug is going to be successful when we put it in the clinic than we have ever had in the past. So assuming this all works like it should, caveat, 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 we should start to see a much higher ROI in terms of if you are investing in clinical programs, you should see a higher percentage of those turning into monetizable products, which should overall lower the risk. The other thing in a precision medicine trial, as we all know, it typically decreases the number of patients that you need to enroll in that trial by a very significant margin, right? So if the costs start to go down, and your hit rate on clinical trials is starting to go up because all of the AI, the non-animal models, the modeling, which is getting better and better. In fact, we're working right now on a couple of projects with Digitalis Commons for clients in that exact space. I think we're going to see. I think we all need to rethink the economics. There's a lot of thought going around this, but I actually believe that we're going to find life sciences to be a much more attractive area in 5 to 7 years for investors than you do right now. Because the big problem right now is, we all know it's, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, depending on how you're talking about, drugs make it through this process. If that goes down to 1 in 6, down to 1 in 5, totally transformative in terms of the economics of this industry. So I think the AI is making some transformative changes, both on, I think, how we do therapeutics and then how we protect those therapeutics, but also in the way those therapeutics are going to be monetized and in the business development, corporate development market as we buy and sell these assets.
Well, yeah, what I have seen in the AI space too is exactly to Chris's point is that AI is helping define patient populations. I believe Michele said that as well. It's also helping define endpoints. And so the disclosures I'm seeing are a little bit more focused, which is helpful, and it's helpful to the market. I think gone are the days of, well, I've got this kinase, it must cure all cancers. And so now you have claims of, I have a kinase and I'm going to treat all cancers. That's gone. Thankfully, that's gone, because that really was a hindrance on commercial activity there. So AI, I think, is helping focus, both to Michele and Chris's point, everything around it to where there'll be higher successes, but there'll also be really focused claims and IP around that, which will increasing success, but it'll also allow other players in other fields. Maybe they'll find another patient population or something along those lines. So I can see on one hand the amount of IP going up a little bit, but it'll be focused. It'll be very, very focused on that as AI kicks out different things that heretofore were not available to the art.
That's useful. I think those are some promising and sort of inspiring perspectives, and
also wishful thinking from an IP attorney. So yeah.
Hey, that's hard to get. So
as an investor, we want to, we're going to manifest that reality.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So thank you for these perspectives, and for being willing to let me throw different topics at you that we encounter in our daily work here at Digitalis. Like I said, we might come back for another one of these, but appreciate your time and your insights, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sia. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Michele.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.